Chapter 10. "Burning!" shrieked Levi Crawford as he slapped his legs. His pupils had dilated to an unnaturally large radius. His ratted brown hair batted about his face as he violently smote himself as though to put out flames that were not present. "Levi," said Samuel in an effort to catch his attention and calm him down. "Easy, my friend. You're not burning." "Put it out!" shrieked Levi. Samuel's eyes began glowing brightly and the room around him took on a blue tint as he slipped into the mind realm. Stephanie was at his side. "His pain is real," she said in a horrified tone. "His relief will be real too," said Samuel. "Come with me." The two of them ran out of the room and found a large well. "We can just throw water on it?" asked Stephanie in surprise. "It seems to work, yes," said Samuel as he lowered the bucket down into the well. The chain that held it clicked with a regular metallic rhythm as it descended into the darkness below. After about a minute, a sloshing sound let them know they had reached the water. He lowered it a bit more to ensure the metal pail would go under the surface and collect the cool fluid. A few moments later, he began reeling the container back up. The screams from Levi in the other room motivated him to hasten. He threw his weight into each rotation to speed the ascent of the metal pail. After a short time, the bucket appeared. Stephanie grabbed it and unhooked it from the chain to which it had been attached. The two of them rushed back into the room with Levi and threw the icy water on him. As the cold water covered him, his screaming stopped. He gasped for air and writhed on the ground in confusion. "Levi, it's okay," whispered Samuel as his eyes glowed. Levi slowly got up and looked at his arms and legs. I was on fire," he said. He looked at Stephanie and Samuel. "You put it out. Thank you." "You're welcome," whispered Samuel. "Why aren't there any marks?" asked Levi as he looked at his large hands. "There were flames everywhere." "There were no flames," said Samuel slowly. "I saw them," snapped Levi. "And that's what I do. I see things. I'm a divine key bearer, you know." His voice was deep, and it carried. Stephanie felt a twinge of fear as Levi's words echoed in the room. He was not a tall man. He was perhaps only a couple inches taller than she was, but he was stocky. His arms and legs were thick with muscle. His brown hair and his short beard featured matted hair, but it was clean. It was clear he was not neglected in this hospital the way that slaves had been in the prisons where Stephanie had been raised. Still, the way he appeared reminded her of the poor souls in Kappa 16's facility. There was the same panicked and confused look in his bloodshot eyes. His skin was pale, and he wore a white robe with white underclothing to preserve both his modesty and dignity when his mind might have thrown these things off. His wide face was twisted with fear and confusion. Stephanie shuddered as she remembered slaves with similar expressions. He was afraid to sleep. Stephanie took advantage of Samuel's power in the mind realm and spoke. "Who did it to you?" asked Stephanie. Samuel turned to Stephanie in surprise. "He will not be able to hear your words here," said Samuel, "but I can, and I will speak them." Stephanie nodded, and Samuel turned to Levi. "Who did this to you?" asked Samuel. "Red," hissed Levi. "Or the old one. They are coming, you know." "How can you be sure they are coming?" asked Samuel. 1,000 years of security," moaned Levi. 1,000 years. Samuel and Stephanie looked at one another in confusion. "I am from 1,000 years in the future," said Stephanie. "We have in our presence a beautiful lady from 1,000 years in the future," said Samuel. Stephanie blushed at his complimentary description. "Does she raise the dead?" whimpered Levi in fear as he retreated to the wall in the room. "No," said Samuel. "She is a divine key-bearer. She is good." Being a divine key-bearer does not make a person good, said Levi. Molly may have meant well, but was what she did good? What did Molly do? Pressed Samuel. Levi screamed and fell on the ground. Stephanie reflected on Levi's words. They triggered a memory she had in the caves with Daniel Young. The Archangel Michael had appeared to her and warned her that every Council of Nine had a betrayer. There was one with evil intentions, one with no intentions, and one with good intentions. She knew the one with evil intentions was Daniel Young, who had voluntarily helped set up the sacrifice of thousands in order to become the destroyer and try to free the archdemon. She also knew the one with no intentions had been Joshua Beckman, the man who had gone mad and killed Peter Kingsley in his insanity. That left only the one with good intentions. She did not want to do it, shrieked Levi. She wanted to help us. Stephanie knew that she had done something. She had betrayed the council, but with good intentions. Stephanie thought about how that would even be possible. Each of the other betrayers had murdered. Daniel Young had willingly murdered thousands. Joshua Beckman had murdered Peter Kingsley. She killed someone, said Stephanie. She killed herself, said Samuel sadly. Yes, but she killed someone else first, said Stephanie. Samuel spun around in shock. Who? Asked Samuel. Why? The price was too high, laughed Levi. It was not a warm laugh, but a sick and confused laugh. It reminded Stephanie of some of the prisoners she had seen in Kappa 16's prison that had given up. Samuel turned back to Levi. Price for what? Asked Samuel. Fire! 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 Screamed Levi. He started slapping his arms again and threw himself on the floor. Stephanie ran to the well in the other room and hooked up the pail. The weight of the pail helped to pull it toward the water as Stephanie lowered it. After a moment, she heard the familiar splash. Put it out! Shrieked Levi from the other room. There is no fire, said Samuel firmly. Stay with us. Stephanie cranked the mechanism and the chain clicked rhythmically as the pail ascended the narrow shaft with its precious water sloshing along the way. It was not long before the bucket appeared, and Stephanie removed it from the chain to which it had been fastened. She rushed with the heavy bucket back to the other room and threw the water toward Levi. Levi gasped and looked down at his arms and legs. He clutched the white material of his robe. It's gone, said Levi. You've saved me. It was not me, Levi, said Samuel. As I said, we have a beautiful woman who is helping. Samuel turned to see Stephanie swatting at her arms and legs. No, she shrieked. Stephanie? Shouted Samuel. Who is Stephanie? Said Levi in confusion. Stop it! Shrieked Stephanie. Samuel gripped his mirrored key and his eyes began glowing brightly as he focused on her voice in the mind realm. What do you see, Stephanie? He prompted. Hearing Samuel's voice snapped her out of her vision. She collapsed on the ground. Samuel rushed to her side and helped her up. She gasped for breath and coughed several times. She looked up and saw the worry in Samuel's face, which seemed to help her calm down. Hellfire, said Stephanie. David Sawyer is coming. The blue tint of the mind realm evaporated as Samuel and Stephanie rushed out of the room. There was no well as there had been to provide relief to the fires in Levi's mind, only a staircase spiraling down. Samuel clutched Stephanie's hand as they rushed down the stairs. They had only gone down a short distance when something struck the tower, and a mixture of fire and stone erupted from the wall below them. Samuel pulled Stephanie back to stop their momentum. They peered out the hole in the tower to see a huge horde of red-cloaked demon worshippers launching fiery bolts in the fields and barns below. We're too late, whispered Stephanie in her mind. Samuel frowned as he turned back to her. He knew that she was right. The two of them had been focused on Levi, and no one had noticed the advancing ranks of fire demon worshippers. "To the top of the tower," urged Samuel. "Let's get a better idea of what's going on." Stephanie nodded and whirled about as they began ascending the stairs. Another huge fiery boulder crashed into the side of the tower, causing the entire structure to shake. They could tell it had been below them, but they did not look back as they raced up. Suddenly Stephanie grabbed Samuel and held him back. He spun around to see Stephanie's eyes glowing brightly. A moment later, a fiery boulder hit the wall and whizzed by. It crashed through the opposite wall and blasted a hole that gave a brief glimpse outside amid the fire and smoke. Stephanie's foresight had just saved them both. Samuel smiled at her, and they resumed their journey up. It took a few minutes, but they finally arrived at the door that led to the roof of the tower. As they emerged and looked out, they were shocked. The barns were burning, and the sounds of people and animals screaming filled the air. "No!" shouted Samuel angrily. "How could this happen?" A stray firebolt from one of the thousands of red-cloaked demon worshippers flew up and struck Stephanie, throwing her back against the white stone. "Stephanie!" shouted Samuel as he turned back. All thoughts of trying to save the tower or rescue anyone else were suddenly swallowed up in the emotional need he felt to protect this woman. He scooped her up in his large arms. He was determined to get her to safety. The other patients would have to rely on Sig and Kirana's power. He tore down the stairs, leaping with incredible speed. He was careful to avoid large pieces of debris, and he ignored the screams from other patients that grew louder as he descended. After a short time, he came to the room where Levi Crawford had been trapped. His screaming suddenly stopped, and he approached the door, which had been blasted open by a fiery boulder. He looked at Samuel rushing toward him, and time seemed to slow down. "Now you see it," said Levi. "Now you see the fire." Samuel furrowed his brow in frustration. Levi had been trying to warn them, but his fragile brain was not able to communicate it even in the mind realm. Regret filled Samuel's heart. He wished he could go back and change everything. "It's okay," said Levi. "The price is not too high. I am ready." Levi leapt out and rushed down the stairs behind Samuel. Samuel picked up his pace as he approached the gap in the stairs that had stopped their downward progress before. He leapt and turned in midair to put his body toward the stone steps below and shield Stephanie, who had still not regained consciousness. Samuel landed hard and skidded down the steps. He groaned as he ignored the abrasions on his back and checked to make sure Stephanie was all right. She appeared to be breathing normally, giving him tremendous relief. "We must stand," said Levi as he pulled Samuel up by the back of his coat and threw him further down. Samuel clutched Stephanie tightly and managed to keep his feet beneath him as he rushed ahead. A moment later, a fiery boulder struck the wall in the place he had been lying. He looked back at Levi in gratitude. "Hurry!" shouted Levi. They continued rushing down the tower. Samuel breathed heavily as he rushed toward the final flight of stairs that led to the exit. He smiled as he saw the orange light of sunset pouring into the entryway, as if illuminating the path to safety. They were nearly to the bottom when a swarm of red-cloaked demon worshipper acolytes stormed in and began throwing firebolts randomly. Levi leapt in front of Samuel and took a firebolt in the chest. As it exploded, his arms and legs caught fire. "Burning!" screamed Levi. "Burning!" He swatted at his arms and legs violently. Samuel searched desperately for a place of cover in which he could place Stephanie and help Levi. Instead, he found the glowing eyes of his old friend Ethan McCarthy staring down at him. "Doctor," whispered Samuel as he gasped for air. "Let me get to Levi first. Let me get to Levi first," said Ethan as he rushed down the stairs. He placed his hands on Levi, and the fire extinguished immediately. Additional firebolts flew around the room, colliding with furniture, walls, and shattering the tall windows. Glass rained down, and Samuel hunched himself over Stephanie to shield her against the razor-like shards. The screams of demon worshippers echoed along with those of Ethan and Levi. Samuel only winced as chunks of glass stuck into his back. "Get the girl to safety," said Ethan as his power healed himself and Levi. The doctor quickly rushed to Samuel and placed a hand on his head. The sharp pieces of glass seemed to ooze out of his body as the painful power of heaven's breath flowed into him. He clenched his teeth as the skin on his back mended the holes that the glass had torn. After a few moments, the pain and exhaustion were gone. "What about you, Doctor?" asked Samuel. "Levi and I will stay here and cover you," said Ethan. "Cover me?" shouted Samuel angrily. "You need to escape too, and the patients." "The patients are dead," said Ethan in a matter-of-fact tone. "Where are the other key-bearers from the future?" asked Samuel in shock. "Can they not help?" "The demon prophetess disguised herself as a patient," said Ethan sadly. "She grabbed Miss Baldwin and drove away. All of the others chased after her." "What?" exclaimed Samuel. "Go to them," said Ethan. "We will cover you." "I can't just leave you here," said Samuel. "The price is not too high," shouted Levi with a smile. "We are ready." "It is just as he said," agreed Ethan. "No," said Samuel. "No, no, no." "I'm not asking you to abandon us, my friend," said Ethan. "I'm asking you to save the girl in your arms. I would not forbid you to risk your life, but I must insist that you do not risk hers." Tears welled up in Samuel's eyes. He cleared his throat and got to his feet. "I will not forget your sacrifice," said Samuel. Ethan smiled and patted Samuel on the arm. "Make it worthwhile, my friend," he said. Tears rolled down Samuel's cheeks as Levi pulled a pistol off of one of the bodies of the fire demon worshippers. Another wave of acolytes was making a run. Bolts of fire flew. Levi rushed toward them and began firing the pistol. Several red-cloaked men fell down as a surge of bolts flew toward Levi. Levi's eyes began glowing as he spun and slid around acrobatically to avoid them. "Farewell," whispered Samuel. His own eyes began glowing as he navigated himself into the mind realm and made his escape with Stephanie. As the world tinted blue, he found himself surrounded by the shouting thoughts of the demon worshippers rushing toward them. The shouting was laced with hatred and fury, and its force nearly knocked Samuel onto his back. "Find the council!" screamed one of them. "Burn their eyes out!" shrieked another. "Make them see fire!" "Char the flesh on their feet!" shouted another, "and make them run to the master of hellfire!" Their will disgusted Samuel, but fortunately Levi Crawford's perfect perception picked them off quickly and allowed him to adjust to the hostility in the mind realm. He turned back once more in gratitude to his comrades who provided him this vital chance to save Stephanie. After the initial group, it was easy for him to find out the thoughts of the invaders and avoid them. After about an hour, he had passed the last group of them and was headed out towards Sarah Hawkins and the others. They came to a grove of trees that provided visual cover from the eyes of demon worshippers. Stephanie stirred in his arms. He slowed to a stop and set her down. "Samuel?" asked Stephanie. "Stephanie," he said in a tired voice. "What happened to the others?" asked Stephanie. "Levi and the doctor provided cover for us," said Samuel as his voice cracked. Stephanie's eyes grew wide. "We must go back," she said. "Not until you're safe," said Samuel resolutely. Stephanie smiled briefly before her thoughts turned to her friends. "Where are Sig and Kirana?" she asked. "They went to save Miss Baldwin," said Samuel. "Miss Baldwin is in trouble?" asked Stephanie. "Dr. McCarthy said she was taken by Sarah Hawkins," said Samuel. "She had disguised herself as a patient." Stephanie's eyes narrowed. "How did I miss that?" she asked angrily. "That was my job." Her eyes welled up with tears. "We'll get her back," said Samuel. We shouldn't have to, she said. I'm supposed to see what is coming. It will be okay, Stephanie, said Samuel. No, she said as tears rolled down her cheeks. Everyone would be okay if I could have seen through her attacks. Those visions. She made you have visions? Asked Samuel. He was surprised. He had not thought that this type of connection was possible in a vision. After all, a vision was only images of the future, or as he had learned from Chloe, a possible future. There was never any interaction she had described. Like forced nightmares, said Stephanie. It was like being attacked. The fear in her voice stirred in Samuel's mind. He instantly related to the feeling she described. That sounds like what the puppeteer does in the mind realm to me, said Samuel, or what he tries to do. But the mind realm is a place where things are happening right now, said Stephanie. I can't fight in a vision of the future. Stephanie seemed to have the same understanding of the mind realm and visions that he did, but hearing the similarity of her feelings, he began to doubt his assumption. Until now, have you really met someone that can see the future with you? Asked Samuel. He recalled his own experiences starting out alone in the mind realm. The thundering voices and raw emotion had been paralyzing. It took him a long time before he realized that he could act, and he might never have done it if it were not for the spirit of his faithful horse Gideon. The horse had provided a connection for him, a way to reconcile the insanity of the mind realm with something familiar and kind. Of course, he did not understand the nuances of seeing the future, but he felt sympathy for Stephanie, and he realized it was not just sympathy. He longed to touch her black hair as he gazed into her dark eyes. He wanted to tell her that she could trust him, and that he would be with her to help her fight this battle. No, said Stephanie. I've been alone. My key has always made me feel uncomfortable and alone. She suddenly realized that she was standing very close to Samuel, and that she had confessed to feeling alone. Her cheeks gained a slight red hue. That must be terribly bitter, said Samuel. His voice was low and calm. Stephanie remembered Erica Kingsley's heartfelt pleading that she let go of her bitterness. She looked up into Samuel's eyes. They were clear and warm. Her heart raced as she looked at him. Being able to speak to someone again without having to scratch her words on paper or type them into a tablet had been so comforting to her. Everyone else seemed to take the ability to speak for granted, but she treasured finally being able to speak with someone. Though she had hoped to avoid developing feelings, she realized that doing so was simply clinging to the hollow bitterness of solitude. She started. She took a deep breath. She could not read Samuel's thoughts. She could only hear the thoughts that he placed in her mind. Even with her doubts, there was an instinctual voice in her mind that assured her that he cared for her. While she had felt chemistry with Jonathan, she felt something stronger with Samuel as she looked into his green eyes. The terror of constantly being watched by the demon prophetess was replaced by a great confidence that she was being watched by someone who was willing to go to great lengths to keep her safe. "Stephanie," he said in a soft voice. He brought a large hand and pulled a stray lock of her dark hair behind her ear. Simultaneously, the two of them moved close and kissed one another. As Samuel pulled her close and she felt his strong arms wrap around her, she reached up and pulled him closer to her. After several moments, their lips parted and they slowly opened their eyes and looked at one another. Stephanie smiled. "I'm not alone anymore," said Stephanie. "No, you're not," agreed Samuel. Stephanie's eyes began glowing brightly as she gripped the mirrored key on the chain about her neck. It was as though a whole new power had been unlocked to her. She grabbed Samuel's hand as she slipped into a vision. Samuel stumbled and fell on the ground, but Stephanie quickly helped him up. "You do this all the time?" he gasped. "I thought the mind realm was bad." Reality twisted and distorted all around them. "Come with me," she said. He got to his feet and followed as they rushed ahead. Everything began blurring as they went faster and faster. After a few moments, she stopped. Samuel squeezed her hand to offer what confidence and compassion he could. She squeezed it back and lifted her other hand to take control of the vision. Slowly, everything began taking shape around them. Chloe Baldwin appeared next to Sarah Hawkins. Chloe was unconscious. Sarah twisted around in confusion and then finally recognized Stephanie. "You?" shrieked Sarah angrily. "How are you doing this?" "Silence, witch!" shouted Stephanie confidently. Sarah retreated back a couple steps cautiously. "You will release Chloe Baldwin." "I will not," snarled Sarah. "We each need one of them." "No," said Sarah. "We already have Lincoln and Savannah Thomas, and by now Ethan McCarthy and Levi Crawford should have been captured." Samuel resisted the urge to speak. They were gathering divine key guardians. Suddenly reality seemed to swirl around the three of them. They watched as another version of Sarah Hawkins drove a carriage. Suddenly a dark cloud surrounded her. "What is this?" whispered Sarah with a smile. Stephanie knew what it was. They were watching a possible future. The black cloud represented the power of the demon key. After a moment, the cloud dispersed and the visionary Sarah stopped the carriage. She pulled out a knife and walked to the door on the side. "It appears as though we already have one of your friends," said the visionary Sarah as she opened the door. "So I can sacrifice you right now." "No!" shouted Stephanie. Both versions of Sarah laughed. Suddenly, Chloe leapt out and kicked the visionary Sarah in the head, stunning her. Chloe leapt for the knife and sliced through her bonds, then jumped atop the carriage and drove away. "What?" gasped the Sarah that had been observing with Stephanie. "Well, no matter. Now I know what to look for." Stephanie grabbed her key, and it transformed into a long, single-edged sword. "What do you think you're going to do with that?" shouted Sarah. Stephanie slashed through Sarah, causing her to vanish in a puff of smoke. A moment later, the entire scene evaporated. "Was that real?" asked Samuel as he gasped for breath. He felt dizzy, but after a moment he was able to recover. "I think I interrupted her powers," said Stephanie. "Hopefully that gives the others a chance to get Chloe, without anyone getting killed." "I'll let them know," said Samuel. "I should be able to speak to Jonathan." He gripped his key and went completely into the mind realm, slumping down on the ground unconscious. "What was that?" came a voice from beyond the trees. Stephanie looked around and spotted several black-robed demon worshippers rushing into the grove. She gasped and tried to pick Samuel up off of the ground. Unfortunately, he was much too heavy for her, and her attempts only succeeded in making more noise. A few moments later, she was surrounded by 6 demon worshippers. Had there only been 1 or 2, she would have felt much more confident trying to fight back. But with 6, her heart sank. "Well," said one of them with a smile, "what have we here?" Her stomach nodded. Even if she had been able to speak and plead for their lives, demon worshippers were not known for being merciful.